not the religious type.
Me? Shit, no, I've got a job. Look, figure the rescue team gets there in 4 or 5 days. 6 tops. You open the door, go in there with smart guns, and kill it.
What have you heard from them?
Nothing much. We got a message received. Later we got something that said you were top priority. They don't cut us in on much. We're the arse end of the totem pole out here.
What if they don't want to kill it?
They get back. They're lunatics, you know. Gotta kill it. Right?
Welcome to Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Prater, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Patrick Green. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm thrilled that we have this next guest on. This is somebody who is very intimately tied to one of both of our favorite films of all time. I am really, really excited to talk about it with him today.
So introduce him.
This is Mr. Ralph Brown, whom you may know as Aaron from Alien 3/85. Welcome, Mr. Brown. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. You're probably the first guest we've had on from Alien 3. I think you're probably the first cast member, the major cast member, because you have your role is very large in that film. But we're going to get to that later. But so again, I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day. I know life is crazy. There's a lot going on even at home to speak with us. So I'm really excited. Like Patrick said earlier, this is my favorite Alien film. This is one of my favorite films of all time. I don't know how you are as an artist in terms of, well, this is the work and I do it and I go on and I move on. Often, sometimes artists are like that and they don't really carry their characters with them. Some of them do, some of them don't. We'll get into that. But before we do, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the business? What was that like?
Well, I did a degree in law, which would be like college for you guys. So, leave school at 18. I went on a 1-year gap year hitchhiking around the United States from New York to LA up to Vancouver and then back to Montreal, New England. I was here for about 4 or 5 months, fell in love with America and have been back many, many times since, and I now live in Brooklyn. But I then went on to the London School of Economics to study law because I was going to be a barrister. And I've spent most of my life since then wondering whether I should have done that. It's what I call my ghost career. I've got a few ghost careers, and they run in parallel to mine, and I can glance across to the left or the right and see how I'm doing if I'd chosen to be a musician or a lawyer. And but here I am in the middle lane as an actor. The reason why I'm an actor is because at the end of that first year of law, I took a gig up in Edinburgh at the festival with a company called the National Student Theatre Company, and I auditioned for it and rehearsed it in London, and then we all travelled to Edinburgh and we were there for 3-4 weeks. And every other person in that play was at drama school. I was the only person who was studying anything other than drama. So they were all like, I was a kind of fascinating insect for them to go, so what are you going to do then when you finish? And I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. I was like, what are you going to do? And they're like, we're going to be actors, man. I was like, you can be an actor. It was like something I'd never crossed my mind. It was a little bit like, I like to play football, soccer, and I played for the school and stuff, but I never considered it being a job. I used to enjoy playing pool. I would never consider that being a job. And yet there are people who do those things for a living. So it was a little bit like, for me, it was a left field kind of, whoa, being an actor. And once I'd kind of considered it and met people who were determined to do it, I knew that was what I was going to do. It didn't happen for another 5 years because I kind of delayed it because I felt like I wasn't quite ready in an image I had to put the blinkers on like for a horse race and be focused and prepared and be able to concentrate on it as a career. So I did mess about for a long time before that. But, I was collecting life experiences, I guess.
Yeah. Were you, when growing up, before you kind of formally became an actor, was this something that you were into? Did you have a special, affinity for film and theater, or is this something that you just had an aptitude for and you kind of found your way into it?
I think the second, yeah.
Yeah.
I was very much into the natural world when I was younger. I think my first thought of what I might do was to be a zookeeper when I was young, and then when I was, I suppose, a teenager and starting to find out, I was very into butterflies, and I still am. Butterflies are my kind of secret passion. So, and then when I was at school, I was very, very good at geography, and as a result, I did a geology course, which I really loved and I excelled at, and I was kind of tempted to go into that as my degree. But you know what? I figured that if I got a very good geology degree, I'd end up working for an oil company, which I did not want to do because no to oil, you know. So yeah, I think I swerved a few kind of poor options early on with a bit of thought, you know. But no, there wasn't much drama for me. Was sort of messing around at school, being in a school play. I was in a school play when I was, I think, 16. That was the second time I was on stage. First time I was in a nativity play when I was about 9, and I played Joseph. Joseph is not a good part. You know,
Quiet.
he doesn't even get to say, "You're what? You're pregnant? What are you talking about?" So you know, so that the bug was in me. I enjoyed being on stage. I enjoyed mimicking the teachers. We did these sketch shows at the end of the year, and we'd all pretend we'd mimic the teachers who'd been teaching us all year, and it was the school absolutely loved that, obviously, and I enjoyed that very much. But I'd never thought of it as a thing to do to earn money. But once I found those guys, it all fell into place, and I felt really lucky to be able to earn, and I still do, to earn a living doing something I really enjoy doing. And that I find actually, apart from self-tapes, which I can talk about later if you insist, but I don't really want to, that's the current mode of auditioning, I find acting actually kind of quite easy. It comes to me very easily. Accents and changes and drama and just being truthful, you know, trying to convincing somebody that I'm telling the truth, even though I'm speaking somebody else's lines in a funny costume with a silly hat on. I can generally convince people that what I'm saying is what I believe to be the truth.
Yeah. It's almost like magic, it really is.
Well, I thought most humans are quite good at that, I think, to be honest.
It's probably true, but we just don't all get paid for it.
Right.
I want to go back for a moment and then I hand it off to Jamie, just to sort of set up an entree before we get into the alien stuff, which is obviously, especially why we want you here today. We were looking at your IMDb page. For one thing, you've been in about 12 million more things than I think I even realized. And I noticed that you were in things all the way back into the early 80s. So was that that was when you started getting cast in things and television, et cetera, and then it kind of snowballed from there?
Yeah. My first ever gig must have been 1981. And then my first professional gig, and these are all theatre gigs.
Right.
1983. Or maybe 2. Anyway, I did a lot of theatre between 81 and 85, and in 1985 I did a TV series which was called The Bill, which is like a cop show. Very gritty, handheld video, no rehearsal, just long takes, and that kind of learnt my screen trade there. Jumped ship after one series because it wasn't kind of varied enough for me, and I just had my sights set on movies, really. I always wanted to do movies. Mm-hmm. I was a movie buff when I was a teenager, which I didn't tell you earlier because I was saving it. And I started turning down theatre work in order to be available for film auditions, which is quite a big deal, really, if you think about it. The idea of a secure job for 3 months in a theatre somewhere. For me, that was like something I really didn't want to do. It wasn't going to lead to anything else. It was just, and I never did that. I think I did one theatre job, and that was Macbeth, and that was the thing that put me off doing theatre for life until last year.
Wow.
but the rest of the time I've devoted my career to doing films, and then of course television comes in between. And I'm proudest of all my movies, I think, than anything else I've ever done.
That was my question in terms of the English system. I mean, there's a rich history of theater and film for sure, but in the American system is different. It's obviously bigger. What was that like breaking through the system in England to get cast in roles, to be on the stage, as opposed to trying to, okay, now I want to jump across and be in American films? I'm sure that there was crossover, but I was curious what that journey was like for you.
Yeah, it seemed like such a long way away, you know, when I was young, the idea of doing a film in America, even though I'd traveled here and spent time. I didn't really have goals like that. I was just kind of going from moment to moment, pretty much. But I was at the Royal Shakespeare Company in London when David Fincher and his team came over to England to cast and eventually to shoot Alien 3 at Pinewood. And I absolutely loved the first film. I thought it was truly brilliant piece of cinema, combining two genres, one of which I was a big fan of, science fiction, and one of which I wasn't, and still aren't, horror. So when I was in this play called Earwig by Paula Mill, and I had my hair kind of long down to my shoulders in the show, and I was kind of like the romantic lead male. And as soon as I got hold of the audition notes for Alien, that was set in a prison and so on and so forth in outer space, sounded like a cracking idea. I went to my favourite barber shop in Soho in London and got my head buzzed, my hair, and they were furious with me at the RSC. They were like, "How dare you get your hair cut without asking us?" I'm like, "It's not your hair, you know." So that was kind of the last time I was ever on stage, through my choice, really. But I look back now and I think maybe I should have done more theatre. Other things, different things might have happened to me. But I don't know. Everyone's got a tendency to look back and wonder what ifs. But I got that gig. You know, I got that that movie, as you know, which is why we're all here this morning. And it's funny looking back on the process that made it happen. I was so focused on making sure it happened that I did that. You know, I kind of crossed the line at work. I did something which I wasn't really supposed to be doing, cutting off my beautiful golden locks and becoming a skinhead, you know.
So Alien 3 was the bridge film for you. It was the film that opened up other opportunities. That'd be right.
Well, it was. I don't know about the bridge film. It was the first American movie.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and David said to me, you know, you got to come to La La Land, Ralph. You know, and he actually encouraged me on many occasions to move to Los Angeles, which I did in 1992, just after I got married, and David and I hung out for the following 2 years, and so yeah, I guess that was crucial, you know, for my Hollywood career. But the film that really got me into doing Hollywood was Withnail and I, which was my first proper role in British film, and it's everything that I've done has stemmed from that movie, actually, including Alien 3, because it was one of David Fincher's favourite films. He wanted all of us to be in Alien 3, and the producer said, "You can't do that. It's lazy, or it's not done, or it's not going to look cool, or whatever the discussion was." They didn't want all of us Withnailers in Alien 3, but they got 2 of us, and there was only 4 of us really in it, and they got me and Paul. Richard was lined up to play Clemens, the Doctor, and they vetoed it. They said, "No, that's too many Withnails. Sorry." But
that's Paul McGann, correct?
Paul McGann, yeah. Paul McGann, who again, he had his part cut considerably by the studio when they recut the movie, because that whole section in the middle with the fire and Golic getting out of his straitjacket and killing Dobie Opera's character and going and asking the dragon what it wants, and I think it eats him in that version of the film. I think you've probably seen it by now. It's on the DVD.
I was just thinking, it's funny here from the outside, looking at your filmography, it's clear that there is something that happens in 1992, right? Because in addition to Alien 3, you do Crying Game, which is a really remarkable picture, which I would like to just take a couple seconds to dive into, if that's okay with Jamie and with you. But also, then Wayne's World 2 and all of this, it really feels like 1992 is kind of a big moment. So from the outside, part of me was kind of wondering what happened, and now hearing it from the inside, you were in Los Angeles, you were working within that system more directly than ever, and I feel like it's clear because the work you were doing was really, really great. Can we talk about the Crying Game for a moment, Jamie? Do you want to kick that off?
No, I was fascinated. I rewatched it last night. I had seen the movie when I was younger, when I came out. Of course, I couldn't see it in the theater, and there was a lot of controversy about it. But I was curious. They were both released in the same year as Alien 3, 92. What was the shooting schedule like? Of course, I think. I almost called him Stephen Daldry, but that's not his name. The director who directed the picture.
Mm-hmm.
What was
Neil
like?
Jordan.
Neil Jordan. I'm thinking of Stephen Rea, who's in the film, obviously. What was the schedule like in terms of having two relatively large films come out in that year? Were you shooting back to back or at the same time?
No, not at all. Crying Game, as I recall, was shot in the fall of 1990 in London, and again, it was a direct result of Withnail and I that I was cast in that. And I knew the producer, Steve Woolley, because I used to work at a cinema in London called Scala Cinema, which was run by Steve and Paul Webster and Dominique Green and other people who are still my friends, really. And that was before I was an actor. I was just a law student, wannabe hopeful monster, and that's another whole story. But so Steve introduced me to Neil, and Neil said, I think there's a role for you in the Crying Game. Do you like the script? And for me, it was the best script I'd ever read, with the possible exception of Withnail and I, which is obviously standalone glory as a piece of work. But when I read the Crying Game, I was just like, I don't care what role I play in this film, I'm going to be in this film. I would have done something with no lines because I thought it was that good. So I was very lucky to be offered, but it was before Alien 3. Alien 3, was it? No, that can't be right, actually. I'm probably talking out my... It's... Because you know why? Because I'm thinking of my hair and my long hair. It might have been... It might have actually been after Alien 3. That sounds weird, though, to me. They certainly weren't together. Alien 3 started in December or January, and went through 5 months around to about May of 1991. And then it didn't come out for ages. So, yeah, I suppose Crying Game could have been that fall of 91. Yeah, that would make more sense in terms of the haircut. This is one of the few ways I have of kind of getting a handle on it. Obviously, my memory is not going to do it for me. But, yeah, no, lucky me. It was a great gig to go on to, and I have very, very fond memories of shooting that movie. The costume director, Sandy Powell, who's a brilliant Oscar-winning costume designer, wanted me to wear a suit. She wanted all the guys in the film to wear a suit. I said I didn't think my character should wear a suit. I wanted to wear sweats, what we called a shell suit back then. And she couldn't stand that idea, but I said, come on, give us a crack at it. And I put one on, and she took a photo of it and showed it to Neil, and he went, yeah, that's a really good idea. So Sandy and me didn't really take tea. And how great would I have looked in a suit? You know what I mean? I haven't always done things that have sort of been good for my career, I don't think. But I just try and do what's right for that particular thing at that particular time, really. That's the only way I can guide myself through a piece of work rather than thinking of, am I going to look good, or any of those stupid things, which shouldn't really operate and which for me don't really operate. So it's only in retrospect that you kind of think, I could have had a suit in that in that film. But no, I realized, I kind of, when I started working on it, I mean, I think the first day was in the pub with Jim Broadbent and Dill and Stephen Ray, and we all sat around and we read the scene, and they were going to light it now and do this, and see you in 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever. Neil Jordan sits down and he says to me, Ralph, the words are terrible. They're terrible. I don't know who wrote this, but I just can't stand it. And he had written it, obviously.
He won the Academy Award for writing it, actually.
He did indeed. And I said, Neil, chill out, man. The words are magnificent. You have to trust them now. You have to trust that when you wrote them, you liked them. Now you're directing them, you look at them and you don't like them, but you have to trust that what you were doing was good, because here we are and we all think they're great. So, oh, all right, thanks, mate. I just found that extraordinary. Do you know what I mean? That kind of tightrope he was walking. I sort of realized on that day that the function of my character was to convince the audience, along with the other things, that Dill was a man. Was a woman. I was part of the structure of the story, which would convince you that this was, and so that in a way the shell suit was on my side, because it's a very working class look, and the suit can be more androgynous, obviously, and in those days more gay if you wanted it to be, whereas the shell suit in those days certainly wouldn't have been gay, although there certainly would have been plenty of gay people who looked like that. I'm just saying in the culture, of London. Yeah, it was, and we had lots of transvestite and what would now be called perhaps trans people coming down, being extras and stand-ins and background artists. We were filming in a very famous gay pub in Hoxton. And it was a scene. It was a bit of a scene doing that film, to be honest. It was really cool.
Well, it's held up. If any listeners who haven't seen The Crying Game yet, it's held up extremely well. It's regarded as a classic. Again, it's Academy Award winning. It's the first thing I ever saw Forrest Whitaker in. He was not somebody I knew about before that at all. I saw it, when I was a teenager, but I didn't have any idea. Also, but James Broadbent, many people will recognize from many things, and Ralph Brown, among others. Yeah. A really great film.
The pub was called The London Apprentice, by the way, for any older gays listening to the podcast in London. They'll know the one I mean.
I'm curious, like your character in this film, as I was watching it, I was like, he seemed to really love her, but then there's a couple of scenes, of course, where he's abusive, he's hitting her, he's demeaning her, but he seemed obsessed with her at the same time. And I felt a little bit, and she would see him, driving by in the car from her balcony, and I was like, this guy really loves this woman, like, and right. I almost felt like initially your character is almost this villain, but then I'm like, I don't think he's this villain. He's just a guy that's in love. He needs to be better behaved. But I was curious what your take on your character is or was.
Sure, good. That's a good question. I felt that he was gay, and he wasn't really telling anybody in his family or his friends that he was. So this was a very under the covers relationship where he could be himself. And yes, he was in love and obsessed with Dill, with Jay Davidson. But also there's a sort of self-hatred there, because he is from a culture where homosexuality is seen as weak. And, he was kind of like one of the lads kind of guy, and I think that part of him frightened him, and he expressed his self-hatred through abusing her. So many people's feelings about themselves have to be pushed out onto the nearest and dearest, because they can't own their own feelings. Yeah, that was how I approached it.
At the end, certainly, when your character eventually is gone, I didn't feel this there's this turn that happens where I was like, I feel a little bit bad for this guy, but I also felt like obviously Dill was hiding who she was too. She
Mhm.
wasn't forthcoming with Ferguson or Fergus.
Right.
She had to, and so he was hiding. Everyone was in stages of hiding themselves from each other. No one
Mm.
was really being forthright with each other. And then when the truth came out, the world kind of exploded after that because
Yeah,
no
that's
one,
the
no
first
one
time in the film. Yeah.
yeah. I thought it was very profound, but I just wanted to at least make a verbal note that I really felt for you, the character that you played, that you could tell that he wanted to live a different life.
Mhm.
And I think that's always a struggle, being your authentic self. And that's what that film is about, is being your authentic self. And the only person who was really their authentic self was Forrest Whitaker's character. He was his
Indeed.
authentic self.
Yeah.
And he died for it. And I
He
thought
paid
it
the
was
price. Yeah.
really great.
Yeah. Yeah. It's everyone leads. I mean, I was thinking about a lot of things yesterday and came up with this cartoon which I saw once in a newspaper, which said two cinemas next to each other. Cinema one has a film called An Inconvenient Truth, and there's one person sort of standing outside. And the cinema next door has a film called A Convenient Lie, and that one's got lines around the block. And that's sort of how we consume culture, I think, and pretty much everything. You know what I mean? We construct this reality, and we do it very carefully, and we do it in lots of different ways. And the truth is something that we reject most of the time, actually. And it becomes an inconvenience, and it becomes something that undermines us, and something which makes us angry, and so on and so forth. You know what I mean? There's an endless conversation to be had about that, but it feels like that's what humans do all the time.
And I've been of the opinion that everyone wants to know the truth unless it involves them.
Right.
You want to watch documentaries, you want to know, unless it involves you or the people that you know, then you don't want much to do with it, because it might incriminate you or cause you to live a more authentic life, which I think people are afraid of doing.
I mean, the whole media, social media culture is about constructing those lies, really, about yourself, as much as anything.
Well, what's so fascinating with social media culture is we're able to construct those lies and then really clearly communicate them to everybody else to reinforce those lies about ourselves too. At least from where I sit, I feel like we construct these little alternate realities for ourselves. But in the past, it was kind of hard to broadcast that so effectively. But now it's like everybody sees each other's alternate realities, and we find ways to merge them together. And it's an amazing time to be alive. You said something a moment ago about thinking about a lot of things yesterday, and I do want to make sure that we have a moment before we move into Alien, if it's okay, just to address your writing career, which goes back quite a long way. This is something you've been doing for years and years. You've won some pretty major awards for it, and you've written, I think, 2 rap musicals, or co-written at least 2 rap musicals. So if we could just, before we move on for a few minutes, if you can just kind of give us a little bit of a whirlwind tour of your writing, and also let our listeners know if they're interested in finding more or reading more of your stuff, where they can get it.
That's a good question. I have absolutely no idea where they can get it, to be honest. They could rent or maybe buy the one movie that I had made, which is called New Year's Day, came out in 2001 in the UK. If you're going to write a movie, I would suggest to anybody, young writers out there, find a really good title that nobody else has used before. Think about that really carefully. Like, for example, My Beautiful Laundrette, right? There's only one film called that. There's only one book, article. You know what I mean? New Year's Day, try Googling that, motherfuckers. You know what I mean? Really bad title. But it's quite a good movie. I'm very proud of it. It cost me a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and nearly cost me my marriage. The stories about that are in my blog, which is at WordPress. Magic Menagerie is my handle, and it's called My Pop Life, written by Magic Menagerie. It's basically a look through my life, my career, my writing, my acting, my friends, my family, my mental illness, and my favorite T-shirts. So good luck with that. As far as writing goes, I got to the age of 29 and sort of panicked because I hadn't written anything that anyone had ever read. And I just thought, I'd always kind of considered that I was going to be a writer or I was a writer. And then I realized that if I hadn't written something by the age of 30, then I clearly wasn't a writer. So I immediately wrote a play about my family and other animals called Drive Away the Darkness. And it's a kind of long day's journey into night, rip-off set in my family home. That got a reading at the National Theatre, and then nothing happened. And I remember asking the director afterwards, like, so what happens next? He goes, well, that's up to you. Depends what you want to do with it. And I was like, well, put it on stage somewhere, you know. And he meant you need to rewrite this considerably. But he didn't explain how or what. He didn't give me any further signposts. And everything I've learned in life, I've had to find out for myself. I don't really had anything explained to me. And if I have, I've completely ignored it, like most people. So the next thing I wrote was a play for Joint Stock Theatre Company called Sanctuary, which was a rap musical about homeless teenagers in London, directed by my friend Paulette Randall. And it was my first piece of writing. It was her first piece of directing. And we toured England, and I won the Samuel Beckett Award for Best First Play for that in 1987, which is a prize which is jointly judged by Channel 4, the Royal Court Theatre, and Faber and Faber publishers. And the play did not get put on Channel 4. Neither did Channel 4 commission me. Neither did the Royal Court commission me. And neither did Faber and Faber publish it. But nevertheless, I still won the Samuel Beckett Award.
You still won the Samuel Beckett Award. I mean, take that, right?
So it was actually picked up by a Washington, D.C. company called the No Neck Monsters, and they talked me into rewriting it and setting it in D.C. And I spent a couple of seasons in DC having a look around and looking at the crack scene and the homeless scene, and it was kind of scary looking back on it. At the time, I was naive enough to be standing on street corners in the wrong part of town at kind of 10 p.m. asking people about their lives, and they're looking at me like, what is wrong with this guy? And I got into some pretty hairy situations, but my naivety got me through it. I would never do anything like that now, but that got nominated for a handful of Helen Hayes Awards, and I don't think we won any of them. I can't really remember. I think I'd have remembered if we had. I then wrote another rap play, which was all in verse, for a sort of rap opera for the BBC, and they didn't understand it, and it's called The House That Crack Built, and based on my experiences in DC, 1989, 1990. Somehow this was all going on at the same time that I was doing my first sort of handfuls of movies and stuff. And then I came to LA after Alien. Didn't work for a whole year in 1995 after Wayne's World 2, ran out of money, had to go back to England, and was so full of fury at having not worked for a year, despite having great reviews for Wayne's World 2, that I penned New Year's Day, the movie. I wrote it in 2 weeks flat, and the story of two boys who decide to commit suicide in 1 year's time on New Year's Day after they have completed a series of tasks which they both have to do. And that's basically how the film unfolds. That got made. I won a few film festivals with that, Raindance and Sapporo in Japan. The Japanese loved it. They asked me to write a novel based on the book. They asked me if they could adapt it for the stage. I've been to Tokyo 3 times now for productions of that play. I love Japan. It's just an amazing country. Lucky me. And since then, I've been asked to write, I think, 6 films, none of which have been shot. One of which was halfway through and they pulled the plug. It's another whole story, which is also in the blog, called Red Light Runners, with Michael Madsen and Roy Scheider and Peter O'Toole, an amazing cast.
Oh my God.
Never got complete. And then the others, which have never been made. So I've never had anything made since 1999, 2001. So 20 years ago, really, since I got a movie made, and I'm still writing them. And now and again, I just give up and think I can't be asked anymore to do that, because because I just can't. I keep having these incredibly non-commercial ideas, which nobody wants to make.
Right.
I'm
I
just
keep
not that-
naming them after holidays for some reason. I don't know. Nobody wants to pick up on that.
I'm just not that interested in commercial
Yeah.
stuff.
Mhm.
It's just not who I am, and I can only write what I want to write. I can't just force myself to write
Right.
some formula stuff. So anyway, that's my writing career in a 3-minute run.
That's great.
What I find fascinating about Sanctuary is you were doing Hamilton before Hamilton. You were
Yeah.
really at the forefront of this, and now, of course, Hamilton is the biggest thing ever. And I was looking for a YouTube. Maybe there was a YouTube performance of it somewhere. I couldn't find anything, but I like that you were ahead of that curve. I mean, the hip hop / rap industry world is ever changing, and it is always kind of present. There's always, whether it's a commercial we're seeing or an audio commercial or something, that's always there. It's sort of the language of the downtrodden in some ways. And Lin-Manuel Miranda really keyed in on that. And I was
Yes,
like,
they
man,
did.
Ralph Brown was doing this before then. I don't know too much about the DC version, but I do think it's interesting. And again, I think it's really the pulse of people without means. This is what, black or white, like Hispanic or like this is what really is the voice of people today.
Yes,
People really
exactly
feel
that. And that, I mean, I was obsessed with it in the 80s, but we also chose it because we were dealing with street kids, and it seemed to be there. And it seemed to be an inherently dramatic form, apart from anything else. And of course it was, but I was amazed really after we'd done it, how little it was picked up. I mean, and I kind of kept having to talk myself into being allowed to do it as a white man. And all my black friends in London were just like, get on with it, do it. If you want to do it, do it. That feeling's just become even more now. House That Crack Built's never been made, and it's still there in my bottom drawer alongside me. And I spoke to a couple of directors recently who were like, "You're never going to get that made, not at the moment, because you're white, you know what I mean? And it's you can't appropriate black culture in that way." And it's like we've suddenly kind of boxed ourselves into this position at the moment where race is more important than anything else. And but yeah, I went to see Hamilton with my wife at the Public Theatre in New York before it hit Broadway, and it was just a joy. It was just an absolute triumph. It was like a game changer. But I recognised a lot of the issues in it that I had when I was writing Sanctuary. A lot of the ways that you don't want to make it all sound the same, and that you work your way towards a rhyme, and then you do internal rhymes and you disguise stuff, and sometimes the word, you're trying to avoid a word sounding like it doesn't sound. So that sometimes, like saying, because instead of because, but yeah, I absolutely loved it.
That is so cool.
That's awesome.
For the sake of time, if I think we're ready, if we can
launch let's go.
into Alien 3. So you took us back. So this was coming out of Withnail and I, correct? That was sort of your entree because David Fincher was a fan of the film. Can you take us back to the primordial days of this? So we've done we actually, we now do these kind of extended series on the individual films as opposed to just sort of always bouncing around. And Alien 3 was the first one that we did an extended series on because it was the one that we loved the most and the one that we had the least access to information on. And so we're like, let's spend like a long time and actually put something together to form some sort of a narrative of how this movie came to be. But because you're the first cast member we've been able to speak to about it, from where you sat as an actor working in the late 80s, going into the early 90s, meeting David Fincher, what was the casting process looking like, and how did you end up at Pinewood?
So I would imagine I'd have been working that evening at the Barbican in London in this RSC play, Earwig. So my meeting would have been around lunchtime. I would have driven to Pinewood from where I lived in Archway Road. I think I'd moved in there by then, in Highgate N6. Driven down, it's quite a long way, by the way, Pinewood. It's actually not in London at all, it's outside. So you have to leave like a 90-minute journey, and then you get a parking slot, and then you go up and wait. And in the room were Ezra Swerdlow and David Fincher. And who was I reading with? I had to read. Maybe I didn't read. Maybe I did. this is interesting because I can't actually remember reading anything. It was just maybe it was just a chat. I think I only had one meeting. Maybe if I had two meetings, then I'd have read, and there would have been Patricia there to read the scene with me. But yeah, I remember David telling me later that after I left the room, Ezra said, "Oh, great, we've got that guy from Withnow coming in a minute, haven't we?" And he went, "That was him." And he was like, "What?" Because obviously I didn't look
because
like
of the hair.
I just had my haircut, right?
Right.
And all of that. So that was counting in my favor. I think maybe David called me or there wasn't email in those days, but somehow a message got through, or phoned me. He said, "Look, we'd like you. I'd love you to be in the movie, but have a read. I'm going to send you the script. Read it, and then tell me which part you fancy." So it doesn't get any better than that, really. That was my fantasy about how my career would end. In fact, it was kind of how it started, and it's not happening anymore. Trust me. But at least it happened. You know, it did actually. I could sort of smell it. So I read it, and I thought, yeah, Morse is quite a good part, and you know, I quite liked quite a few of the parts, really, as it was then, anyway. Quite fancied the Doctor. They said, no, not the Doctor, you know. So yeah, Aaron was just the obvious one, really. He said, "Great, fine, it's yours." You know, unbelievable feeling.
Do you remember
Scary.
which version of the script you were looking at that point? Was this like the pre-final version that he was working on for shooting, or how did it differ significantly from what you filmed? Do you remember?
You know what? I can't remember, but I know Vince Ward did the first one, and I think there were more inklings of that in it, but it changed. I mean, once we started shooting, it would change on a daily basis.
Right.
As I've said in the blog, My Death in particular was rewritten 6 times in really major ways. Different scenes, different types of dying. I mean, it was incredible. And I think in the version that I read, it was a kind of a heroic death of some kind, and then Sigourney got wind of David's plan to make me a heroic character, and she was like, "No, that's not going to happen." And so there was all that whole issue that happened. So then it was like he just falls into the lead mold. The alien, you know, eats his head. He gets burned in a fire. You know, I mean, I've saved them all. I've got those pages still, and they would just get sort of shoved under your dressing room door in an envelope, and you'd open it and you go, "Oh, okay." I mean, it's just incredible. I'd never worked like that in my life. It's not as unusual as you'd think for people to still be writing and messing about with a story when they're shooting it, and you know, even actors get involved as well, and they start saying, "Oh, let's not do that. Let's do this," and so on and so forth. And it depends on what state it's in. And it's funny filmmaking because sometimes you can be doing a script like The Crying Game where one person's written it and it's just their vision and that's it, you know. But in Hollywood, that's very, very rare. I mean, Aaron Sorkin springs to mind, but often a lot of them are kind of, you know, you look on the front page and it says written by. And there's 6 or 7 or 8 names there, you know, because it's been passed around and rewritten and reshaped, and another director gets on board suddenly and they give it to their mate to have a go at it, and that name gets added, and so it becomes this kind of thing that gets passed around, and you get it eventually, and you're supposed to bring it to life. So you start having a go at it yourself as well, you know. So yeah, it was changing. It was changing all the time. Pretty soon after that, got invited to Pinewood one evening after they'd finished working, and a lot of the designs were being built. Some of them were finished, and so David and Ezra and his PA and Sigourney and I think Charles Dutton was there. Charles Dance and Yeah, there was about 6 of us, and he walked us around and showed us all the sets. So he had quite a big tour of the whole studio and showed us, well, this is what this scene's, this area is going to be like this. And he was kind of really excited, you know. David was young. He hadn't directed a movie before. He had sort of this whiz kid reputation because of his commercials, and worked with Nike and Madonna and people like that. And I've got a feeling that the people who ran the franchise thought that, you know, he was a visual guy who'd make the film look amazing, but who'd basically do what he was told. And of course, that wasn't the case at all. He's a very bright, very singular kind of character. And once he took the reins, he wasn't going to let anyone else have a go. And there was big battles between him and Michael London. I think there was more respect between him and Walter Hill and David Giler, who were also in London and with whom I had a run-in. Yeah, the first big rewrite for me came when they added the 85 idea, which certainly wasn't in the first couple of scripts.
That's right.
That came after we'd started shooting. In fact, I'd already shot 2 scenes, I think, with Brian Glover and Sigourney and Charles, and then suddenly, because David had me in the office, and he kept getting me into the office and was talking about his ideas of like, look, people aren't going to identify with Ripley in this film so much because she's got one, you know, in the words of the prophet, she's got one inside of her. So that they're going to understand that she's going to die at the end of the film. That's kind of written. It's a sort of sacrificial. It's a bit like the New Testament. You know, there will be a death at the end, and the audience will get that as soon as that moment happens. And so, therefore, we have to give them a character that they can root for, because they can't root for her in the same way if they know she's going to die. They have to root for some poor sod in this story, and it's going to be you. You know, and I was like, fine. He said, so we're going to do this, this, and this, and you're going to have a family, and you're going to be thing. And then Sigourney found out about that, and she just was like, that isn't going to happen. And I got summoned to a meeting at then the 85 came in as a rewrite, and 85 IQ, and that was the joke with the prisoners and thing. And I was like, it just felt like for me, it felt like a sort of sabotage of what I was doing, and I had already started work, and I hadn't got a character together who was going to be able to sell that idea. So I was going to have to stick to more or less unless they were going to offer to reshoot those bits, which they didn't. You know, if that had been in it from the beginning, you know, I could have done a Tom Hardy type Elvis Presley, like kind of like sort of one of those guys who just talks like that and who's pretty charismatic, you know. You know what I mean? And I didn't have that. It was like thrust right in the middle of shooting. And so I said, no, I'm not doing that. I just said no. So then Walter and David summoned me to their house in Holland Park and said, Ralph, what do we got to do to make you understand that this is going to be the way it goes? And I said, Walter had these shades on, right? He's like a scary motherfucker. But I later learned that he has some kind of cataract issues, and that the shades were not to scare people or to make him look cool. It was because his eyes had an issue. Anyway, I didn't know that. I just thought they were trying to intimidate me, which they kind of were. And but they were trying to do it in a nice way. You know what I mean? And he was like, so I think the first or second thing I said was, okay, this is my negotiating position, guys. I have no negotiating position. And they just laughed because they knew that was true. See, and at the same time, all of us Brits, in particular, who were in the movie, were like passing around stories of what had happened on Aliens. And in fact, Walter did actually mention that. He said, you don't want to end up like, I can't remember her name now, but there's in the first film, was it? One of the women, one of the actresses, was heavily cut from one of the films. He's like, you don't want to end up like her, do you? You know, wow. It was like that.
It's like a mafia meeting or something.
Yeah, and I was like, my negotiating position is I have no negotiation. They found that funny, but we knew that one of the actors on Aliens had been sacked. That was also shot in Poland because he was caught taking LSD while it was being shot. I don't know who it was. I would tell you if I knew. I don't know who it was. And they were replaced. And he'd already done at least 6 weeks of shooting. And they reshot every single scene that he was in with a new actor. So we knew that even up to 6 weeks, we could be sacked. Any of us could be sacked, because they look at the rushes, they look at the dailies and go, "Nah, he's not any good, is he? He's useless, that one. So should we get another guy for that?" So everyone's under that all day. So yeah, it's a horror film. Yes, it's a horror film. So we've all got to feel paranoid every day. You know, and then Linda, Sigourney's makeup artist, was in an accident. One of those Star Trek doors just fell down onto the bridge of her nose and broke her face open. And, you know, the horrible film sets are dangerous places, you know, and somebody, you know, it's just a bit of wood with a weight on the end of it or whatever, you know what I mean? And it looks great, but actually it's just a bit of wood. And she was standing in the doorway. There are horrible things like that happening, and making everybody just feel jittery. And then Sigourney was the heart of it. You know, Sigourney was the paranoid person in the middle of it, who had a shaved head, looked herself in the mirror every morning and didn't like what she saw, you know, and that feeling was the one that she gave me and anyone else who was nearby, really. She was doing it to Charlie Dance as well. We found out a few weeks into the shoot, which was a great source of solace for me, because I felt very lonely. And I would tell my fellow actors, and they all thought I was completely crazy and paranoid and making it up. And "She's lovely, Ralph. What's wrong with you, man? She's gorgeous. You're just being paranoid, mate." And I was like, and I'd never worked on a Hollywood film, so I didn't really know what to expect. But I really thought I was sinking. You know, I really did. I thought this is whatever it's. And I found out Richard E. Grant, who's in with now. He was working in Italy somewhere, and I said, "I'm having a really bad time on this film, Rich." He said, "How much are you getting paid?" I said, "I'm getting 40 grand or whatever it was. I can't remember." He goes, "You got to eat 40 grand's worth of shit then." That was his helpful guidance. From
great. I believe Confucius actually came up with that. I think this goes way back.
Yeah. I mean, things settled down after the Guyla Hill meeting, and the 85 was in, and I just kind of played it the same as I've been playing it, really, because I didn't have much choice. I didn't want those 2 scenes I'd already shot to stick out like, "Who's that guy? Why is he different from the other?" You know, it was
what happened to
a weird thing.
Right.
It was a weird thing, and Sigourney carried on the kind of low level guerrilla warfare to put me off my acting and stuff.
Was she doing that?
Is that how you're going to say it? Is that how he's going to say it? Like that kind of classic nonsense, you know. Wow. We look like 2 bookends. Are you slouching? How come your costume is so clean? We're all dirty. How come you've got your hair? We're all bald. And Brian Glover, the lovely Yorkshireman who was my boss, was like, "Executive dress." You know, he always had a good one-liner to fuck her off, you know. But I remember telling Paul McGann one day, I said, "I'm having a bad time with Sigourney. She keeps trying to undermine me and wind me up." And she walked over and she went, "Oh, look, a little tete-a-tete between Mr. Sublime and Mr. Ridiculous. I'll leave you 2 guys to work out who's who." And she walked off. And Paul went, "She's going the right way for a smack in the mouth." Which is... Paul was more relaxed about everything than me, you know. I always take it on and try and analyze it and try and work out what's going on. But yeah, I used to go home every night to my wife and go, "I just want to curl up in a ball and get shot into space. I'm not enjoying this gig at all." You know? And then Brian, you know, would be on a, you know, that circular fan with all the meat of a dead person inside it, and Glover would be there, and you'd go, "This is a bit gruesome, isn't it? This seems a bit nasty, you know." And Brian would be like, "Or we could go to Baghdad and see the real thing," because that wall was on at the time, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, and then once I started chatting with Charles Dance, and everything became a bit clearer, and I started realizing that it wasn't about me, really. I was just there. It was about her, and he was getting the same kind of thing, and we just sort of cheered ourselves up a bit and just got on with it, really.
Was her behavior in any way trying to inform the actual story, or was it just shitty behavior? Like I remember just hearing stories about the original Alien, and certainly in Aliens, where they had Yaphet Kotto really antagonize Sigourney Weaver, so that antagonism would come out when they started shooting, so that there was this thing between them, and it was really effective. And I was curious if you think that was part of it.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I don't agree with it, because as an actor,
Okay.
I believe in acting, and I think if you're trying to antagonize somebody in real life so that they're antagonistic towards you on set, then you're a bit stupid. And I think if it's written down properly in the scene, you should be able to act it, you know. And I do believe in acting as a craft. But no, I mean, Aaron and Ripley are supposed to get on in the story. I mean, the 85 thing, yes. I mean, that may well have been to further the story. So I'm not casting aspersions on that particularly. It's just the way it was done. But the idea of just asking me how I'm going to read a line while I'm actually reading the line is just kind of instinctive and brutal. And there's one scene in the film where there's just the two of us, and we're assessing something or other. I had a lot of scenes with just me and her, and on the whole, they're like, what should we do type scenes, what should we do now type things, because Brian Glover gets killed early on, and so I become in command. And so we're both kind of vulnerable people, really, at that point in the story, and that sort of works, but we're not antagonistic towards each other. But there was one thing when I said something and she had to answer with something like, yeah, that's a good idea, or something like that. And every time she said it, it was like, yeah, that's a good idea. And David was like, okay, let's do one more. She goes, no, that is a good idea. Yeah, okay, just that is a good idea. That's a good idea. One more. We did 39 takes of that until she got so tired. She just went, yeah, that's a good idea. And David went, got it, print it, good, let's all go home.
Oh my God.
And then 2 years later, doing ADR in LA, automated dialogue replacement, because it was a very noisy set, lots of steam and lots of stuff like that. David said, if I'd known about ADR then, I wouldn't have done 39 takes on that one scene just for a line reading, because we could just do it in the studio afterwards, you know. So that was his kind of learning curve. But yeah, she kind of developed this hostility towards me that she kind of couldn't disguise on set, and it wasn't to serving the story at all. And David had to work around it. And he came up to me. He was very sweet. He came up to me after one scene and said, "Look, she vampired that scene off you, Ralph." He said, "But I can cut it together. I can make it work." He said, "But anytime you need me, you've got to call me out, and I'll let you. I see what's going on. I see exactly what's going on. You're not on your own. I'm here." My sanity, really, because I thought I was going mad. I mean, she apologized afterwards, by the way. I don't want anyone to think that we're now sort of sworn enemies. And she said sorry, and she thought I'd done a great performance and everything else. But you know,
Well, that's good to know.
yeah,
That is good to know. It seems like
I don't want everyone to get depressed. Obviously, listening to this, I'm trying to just basically share my experience of making that movie, and that's
Yeah.
It seems like that was a lot of people's experience of making that film. The tension was just off the charts the whole time for all sorts of various reasons that existed long before you showed up to the set, and I think permeated everything all the way through post-production. You know, it seems like a very stressful film.
And I think David and Sigourney both took that tension into themselves, you know what I mean, and had to live on a day-to-day basis with it. And then some of us that were close to those two people sponged it up as well, because you know, that's what happens. But I thought that happened on every film, of course. I was like, this is, you know, with Now and I wasn't like that, by the way. But, you know, on Hollywood films, I thought, oh, this is what Hollywood films are like, you know. And Richard kind of confirmed that with his kind of crack. And that's not the case either, you know. But I've worked on quite a few Hollywood films which are pretty weird vibes, you know what I mean? So it's not entirely out of the ordinary either.
What do you want to say?
Tell them the whole place has gone toxic.
Are you kidding? Then they won't come here. The rescue team will turn back.
Yeah, I know.
What are you talking about? Our only hope is that they kill this fucker. And maybe they can do something for you. I don't know. Freeze you. They can do an operation. They've got the technology.
If this organism gets off the planet, it'll kill everything. The company doesn't care about that. They just want it for their bioweapons division, okay? So we can't let them come here.
Fuck You. Look, I'm sorry you've got this thing inside you, but I'm getting rescued. I don't give a shit about these stupid prisoners, but I've got a wife. I've got a kid. I'll go home on the next rotation.
I know. This is hard. I'm gonna send this message back, and I need that fucking code.
I'm sorry, babe. It's classified.
Listen, you stupid little shit. This has got to be done, okay? There are no alternatives.
You're not getting it. No fucking way.
I think interesting about your character in terms of like the attitude of, no, we don't want to give Aaron a heroic death. But you did. You had a bit of a heroic death. You saw something was wrong. Obviously, you made a decision. It ended your life, but it was a heroic way to go. And he was a very sympathetic character. And I also find it strange that people, the person who said people aren't going to identify with Ripley, like, people identified with Ripley, with Aaron, with Dylan, with Clemens. There was lots of connections being made with these characters because it's the human experience. It's the human condition.
I agree.
So she might have looked like everybody else in terms of her shaved head and what she was wearing, but we were there with everyone. Like, and because there's this big reveal, which is we aren't each other's enemy. The company is the enemy. And then everyone coalesce around that reality. So it was just interesting that someone would say people aren't going to be with Ripley to you. Like you can't be sympathetic. Because that's not how it plays out. But
that was Fincher's analysis of the trilogy at that point. And he was unnerved by or thought he was ahead of the game, I suppose, in trying to predict how the audience might react to the knowledge that she's kind of pregnant with a baby alien, pretty much, hey, it was like everyone was sharing feelings and experiences. I think it was David's idea to have me try and have a go at Lance Henriksen at the end. I think that was the compromise that was made in the end. And it was just those first few months which were just extraordinarily weird, and then it just settled down. It just settled down into work. Four units running alongside each other. All of the actors called in every day, put through makeup, wardrobe, sit on standby in your dressing room, play backgammon, listen to sort of off-color stories, and then, oh, Ralph, you wanted on fire unit, and you'd go out and you'd shoot for half an hour, and then you'd go back to your dressing room. And there was months of that, and then there were reshoots in Los Angeles as well. And
how long did the shoot? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
5 months. It was a 5-month shoot, and at the end of it, David invited a group of us: Danny Webb, me, Charlie, Paul, Rock Dutton, and Sigourney, I think, was there, or maybe she'd gone back home by then. But he invited us to a screening, and he'd put a lot of Aaron Copland music over it because he hadn't got a score yet. But he'd done his cut. He had his final cut, and it was the full cut. And he'd said to me when we were shooting, he said, I know they're going to try and cut it. They're going to take it off me and try and cut it. He said, that's why I'm doing long tracking shots, because it's very difficult to cut into a long tracking shot. And that's why I'm doing it. So he was kind of over prepared in a way. He was mentally kind of like on the defensive about almost everything to do with everything, like in terms of the story, the characters, the actual mechanics, the camera, you know what I mean? He felt like they only wanted him for a few good shots, and then they were going to just make the cut how they want to start. I can understand him wanting to direct it. I can also understand him deciding to say, no, actually, I don't want that. I don't want that gig. But having decided to take it on, he was then put in that position. He's a bright guy, and he showed us his cut, which was absolutely brilliant. I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. I think he knew it was as well. And of course, the one that came out wasn't that. And the one that Alex Thompson put together also wasn't that. It was nearer because it had that missing section in it. But there was just something about that cut that I was just very, very proud of on his behalf, really. And he kind of stopped talking about it, like he didn't want to talk about it anymore once that cut had been made, and we may have had one or two drunken conversations about it in Los Angeles. But on the whole, he just kind of turned his back on it and walked off, and he's never looked back on it, and we've never talked about it since.
Wow, it's amazing. It's just neither here nor there, but it's interesting you mentioned that they were using Aaron Copland for temp scoring because, of course, he was one of Elliot Goldenthal's instructors at the Manhattan School of Music. So it's a little bit of small world trivia right there.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a scene that you mentioned a little while ago that I think might have been the scene that I actually wanted to ask you about. So I apologize in advance if it's kind of a painful scene to talk about. But there's a moment with your character that I just really love because I think it's a very human moment. And it's when Ripley is trying to get a quarantine order, right, to prevent the commandos from coming. And you are refusing to cooperate with that. And this is after you've basically helped her discover the gestation situation. You've had this very kind of human moment with this woman who you've been pretty antagonistic with throughout the whole film. And it's actually a very kind of human thing. And the conversation escalates quite a bit. And you bring up the fact that you have a family. You bring up the fact that you're not going to allow her to do this. And she walks all the way down this long corridor of some kind and is basically whispering to you. And you're all the way back and you're not picking up on her metaphor. And I just, for some, that sequence to me has always stuck out as one of the strongest in the film. And I think a lot of it is because of the chemistry that you have with Sigourney in that scene and this fact that your character is playing through a lot of different strata of things, right? Because like you are at the end of the day, a company person, right? Like you're somebody who's there to do a job. You're also somebody who exists outside of Fury 161. You're somebody who's waiting to go home for very specific reasons, right? And you're somebody who doesn't get to make it there. And that's something that as a father watching this, I'm always really haunted by the fact that you never got to go home to see your children, and I did the way that scene unfolds is really amazing. So I guess my question is that the scene you were talking about? Because I'm assuming there was ADR for when she was down the hallway. Oh no, it's not. Okay. And can you take us back just to when you were shooting that and what was going through your head? Because it's just a great scene to me.
I wish I could, Patrick, but I cannot remember shooting that scene.
Really, at all?
No. Wow. No, I can remember the lines. I can remember I've got a wife and kids. I think that was later on, I have to say, because I think I was, I just think I was more confident then about what I was doing. And I knew that I had the backing of David to sort of, do my best work really if I could. So I think that was probably one of my better scenes, to be honest. But I can't really remember what happened on the day or how the technical aspects of it. I'm sorry.
Have you got any ideas?
It won't kill me. I'm carrying the new queen. It won't kill its future.
You really want to bet this thing's that smart?
Maybe I'll go find it. See how smart it is.
You're going to go and look for it?
Yeah. I have a pretty good idea of where it is. It's just down there. In the basement.
This whole place is a basement.
It's a metaphor. I want to go.
Fuck me.
What's interesting about that scene, though, is Sigourney or Ripley as a character, she's taken control in all of her movies, whether it's with an alien, she ends up having to assume control of the Nostromo or whatever. And then in Alien, she's assumes control again because it's kind of given to her, like, we don't know what else to do. You're the best person for the job. Let's do it. But she's always been very like, okay, we got to get this done. And there's this one scene in Aliens where she takes Burke up and she goes, do you have any idea what you've done here? She throws him against a wall. But there's a moment where she does this with Aaron, but it doesn't work. Obviously, Aaron isn't Burke. He's a much better guy. He's not like skeezy. But I've always found it where it has worked for Ripley each time, where she's taken control. She's been physical with men, which is very interesting. You don't see that very often in film. Mm-hmm. She gets physical with Aaron, but she can't overpower Aaron. She can't. She doesn't. Aaron could give her that power, but he didn't. He assumed control. And I thought this hadn't happened in an Alien film before, where Ripley is really saying, hey, this is what we have to do. And usually people are like, okay, we're going to do it. With Aaron, he was like, sorry, this isn't happening. And that's that. And you could tell the frustration that she had with your character from that point on, where she wanted to do something and he wasn't going to let her do it. And I really find that exchange, it's an exchange of power. And it's a relinquishing of power because she has none. I found it really powerful.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that's in the script. And I think it's a deliberate and kind of smart sort of rewrite of the other. You know what I mean? It's like they're taking it to the next level, and it's like they don't want to show the audience something they've seen before. They want to keep unfolding something else and keep taking them in a place where they feel uncomfortable, really, and they don't know what's going to happen next. So it's sort of unpredictable, and I think that's what that is.
Ironically,
just quick, it functions almost as a pre-death of Ripley, I think, in a way, because we start to see her as we saw her back in the first film in the beginning, when she was, going up against Ash with the quarantine orders and things. Like we're seeing her actually having ceded some of that power to a degree. And I think as an audience, we're kind of preparing ourselves, like, this actually is real. This is the actual end. This is where things come. And it doesn't happen with a bang, and it doesn't happen with a whimper either. It happens with something very subtle and very in the middle, which is it's a human conundrum, right? Like, her doing that will doom everybody, basically, for the sake of this righteous mission that she's on to exterminate this organism. And you just want to go home. And what I love about Aaron, and something that I've always really appreciated about this character, is that he's not an idiot. He's a little simple. He's a little kind of just like outside. He's not cutthroat. He's gotten to where he is probably because he's just kind of good at his job, and he goes with orders, and he doesn't really ask too many questions about it, but he's not nefarious, And for so much of the rest of the series, we see Weyland-Yutani as this very kind of malevolent entity, right? But the reality is that a lot of people who contribute to malevolence are usually not even aware that they're doing that. A lot of people are just sort of doing their job to provide for their wife and kids back home, and they're on an assignment, and they're going to come back from Baghdad, and they're going to come back from that airstrip, and they're going to forget what happened. They're going to go to work the next day, and they're going to take their kids out to the picnic. But what Aaron provides us as an audience is a humanizing moment, not just for Ripley to play off of, but also for the corporation, and for seeing this thing as something more than just this, this monolith, because it's not, and evil is never that simple, I think. So your character, I think, is a really interesting avatar for that, for the audience.
Well, he has something to lose,
Yes, yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think they needed a character who had something to lose, because none of the other characters really did.
Yeah.
Especially not the cult in the prison. And the Doctor maybe was the other character who had something to lose, I think. But then he gets killed incredibly early, really, if you think about it. I think we all felt that maybe the Doctor should last a bit longer in the story for that reason. But I think they enjoyed. And my other criticism of the film was, at the time, and I think I haven't seen it for a while, but I always felt we never got to know enough of the prisoners well enough to really mourn their deaths, and I do think that's a rule of cinema, that if you're gonna kill characters, if it's a kind of a slasher type movie, at least on one level, if you care about those characters, every death is going to count. I mean, the classic film that does this is Unforgiven, where every single death really matters, and really is like a real horrible, lingering, slow death. And that death itself is the sort of powerful extra character in the film. Whereas if you just go bang, 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 and people fall over, and they fall over, you just think that's kind of cheap. And I think there's a danger in those Alien films, especially 3, I think. Well, all of them, apart from the first one. The first one has a very small and very intimate cast, and that's why it works very well. And the second one has this kind of bang, 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 bang. And we're somewhere in between those two, and you do get to see them and those characters, and you do get glimpses of them, and everyone gets a little couple of moments. But I suppose I always felt like want to see more of those guys, so that when they die.
Well, I know we're going to wrap shortly. I have one final question before we go. Jamie, do you have anything else you want to?
Yeah, well, I just thought, as I was thinking about when we first started talking, you were talking about being in the Nativity when you were 9 years old, a play, and here you find yourself in Alien 3, sitting next to Sigourney Weaver, and it's a similar situation. She's pregnant and she doesn't know how, and you don't know how either. And so there you are again in a very similar role, in a form of the New Testament where Jesus dies at the end. I just thought it's great symmetry.
You're a funny guy.
I would suppose my final question is, what do you think of the film?
Very proud of it. Very, very proud of it. It's my favorite of all of them. I love how difficult it is as a film. I've heard the theory, and I would subscribe to the theory as well, that each film really guides us through American history of the late 20th century. The first film is the Watergate film. And it's the company. The company is the enemy, not the enemy, not Russia. And the second film is the kind of the end of the empire, really. Grenada. Reagan goes into Grenada with the entire force of the US military in this tiny little island, which has really no army or navy to speak of. And Alien 3 is AIDS. It's inside you. It's actually perfect for COVID-19, and it's a sort of haunting film. And there wasn't anywhere to go after that. For me and for a lot of fans of Alien. There was a fourth one, of course, which is watchable, but and then there was Alien, Predator, and other kind of video games or whatever. But I sort of subscribe to that theory, really, and I like how thoughtful it is, really. I like how bleak it is and how close to reality it tries to be, given the circumstances. And I think it's a lot of its power comes from that, and of course from Fincher's instinctive and magnificent use of cameras and his sensitivity as a director, which has been proven since then. He's one of the greats, and I'm very lucky man to have spent time with him and to have been directed by him.
I think that's a marvelous place to stop. I think that's a wonderful reflection. Thank you so much, Ralph Brown, for being here with us today, for giving us so much of your time in the middle of a busy workday during a crazy year, in the twilight of a year that we'll never forget, and joining us and being so open and so eloquent. And thank you for everything. And thank you for making one of my favorite films. It came out when I was 7, and I've watched it maybe 300 times since then. And every single time I do, I see you up there, and I appreciate you. And you are in many of our hearts an Alien fandom out there. And this means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
Bless you, Patrick. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for listening to my miserable story.
No, I would echo those sentiments. I think for myself, I would not have survived my teenage years without Alien 3. I was a teenager when it came out, and I went through a very, very dark time. And everybody who knows me knows this. So to talk to someone who was involved in a movie that essentially saves your life in a way, it's a powerful thing. Stories are powerful. We all know this. I echo Patrick's sentiments.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. For more on Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast, please visit perfectorganism.com. Perfect Organism is available for listen or download through Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and Spotify. If you'd like to support the show, please visit perfectorganism.com/support. Thank you.